keeping up with everything happening globally can feel like a lot. So today, we're going deep on one really critical and pretty emotional story.
Yeah, it's this growing split inside Israel over the Gaza strategy. Specifically, you're seeing more protests against expanding the military operation.
Exactly, and it boils down to this core tension, doesn't it? You've got this intense push to get the remaining Israeli captives home.
Versus the government saying, no, we need to defeat Hamas first, potentially through, more military action.
Right, so for this deep dive, we're looking at a report from Al Jazeera. It lays out what the protesters are arguing, the government's position, and some expert takes on what this could all mean.
Okay, so let's dive in.
Let's do it. So these protests, the report gives specifics, right? Where and when?
Yeah, it does. It says thousands gathered outside the Ministry of Defense in Tel Aviv. This was Saturday, May 3rd, 2025.
Ministry of Defense, so right at the heart of military decisions.
Precisely. A very symbolic location.
And what was their sort of main message? What's the core demand?
It was really clear. Prioritize getting the 59 remaining captives out of Gaza. That's number one.
Above escalating the fighting.
Exactly. Their biggest fear, and the report really stresses this, is that a wider assault will just, put those captive lives in even more danger. It's a very raw human concern driving this.
Absolutely. I saw the report mention some specific things like placards. There was one quote that really jumped out.
Oh, yeah. Targeting Netanyahu. It said, our tyrant is a liar. Because of him, the state is on fire. Pretty strong stuff.
Wow. Yeah, that really shows the level of, I guess, anger and frustration some people are feeling.
Definitely. And the timing here is crucial, too. This happened right after the government greenlit calling up potentially 60,000 more reservists.
60,000. That sounds like a clear signal they intend to ramp things up in Gaza, doesn't it?
That's how it's being read, yes. A sign of intensification.
Which, I mean, you can only imagine how that news landed with the families of the captives. The report used the phrase excruciating anxiety.
It's hard to even fathom, isn't it? And that anxiety seems to have really pushed the Bring Them Home campaign. That's the group representing the families.
How did they react to the news about the potential escalation?
They were blunt, called it reckless. They put out a statement, a really powerful one, saying Israel is, quote, sinking into the Gaza mud.
Gaza mud.
In the name of the illusion that it is possible to achieve any victory without returning our brothers and sisters from captivity.
That's incredibly stark. So they're saying victory is meaningless or even impossible without getting the captives back first.
That's the core of it. They see the government's path as not just dangerous for the captives, but ultimately kind of self-defeating for Israel's own stated goals if rescue is part of that.
And they appealed directly to Netanyahu.
Yes, very directly, basically pleading with him to scrap the expanded offensive, focus everything on getting a deal done for the captives' release, stop what they see as a terrible mistake.
Okay, so you have this really vocal public pressure, the family's agony right there. What's the government saying? How are they justifying their stance?
Well, Prime Minister Netanyahu, just before the protests actually, made public statements saying that victory over our enemies is the supreme goal.
Supreme goal, that phrasing.
Yeah.
It does seem to place the military objective perhaps ahead of the immediate captive release, at least an emphasis.
It certainly suggests that prioritization, yeah. Now, the government's official line, the justification, is that this military pressure is the way to get Hamas to release the captives.
Right. The idea is that pressure forces their hand. And just for listeners, Hamas is the Islamist militant group that controls Gaza.
That's the stated rationale, but there's a lot of skepticism about that, especially as you'd expect from the captives' families.
They don't buy it.
No. The report says they've actually accused Netanyahu of undermining previous truce and swap deal attempts.
Undermining them? Why would they think that? The report touches on potential political reasons, right?
Yes.
Like keeping his coalition together.
That's the accusation mentioned, yeah. That political survival might be influencing decisions, maybe taking priority over, the urgent need to bring those people home. It adds this whole other layer of complexity and, frankly, distrust.
Which just fuels the protests even more, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay, protests, families' pain, government decision. What about outside analysis? The report quoted an Israeli journalist, Gideon Levy. What was his take?
Levy called the protesters courageous and devoted. He acknowledged their commitment, but he also offered a pretty sobering view.
Which was?
That the protests, while passionate, are likely not big enough to influence Netanyahu.
Ah, so despite the noise and the moral weight, he doesn't see it actually changing government policy anytime soon.
That seems to be his assessment. And he points out something else, too, that a large chunk of Israeli society actually still supports the war effort, even with the family's visible suffering.
Really? Even now?
Yeah. He suggests there's a kind of historical tendency, almost cultural, where Israelis generally obey when the call to war goes out. So there's still this deep well of support for military action that might be stronger than the calls to, prioritize the captives through other means.
And that's a really important dynamic to understand. The report also mentioned briefly that earlier ceasefire and prisoner swap. Why bring that up now?
Well, the fact that the earlier exchange, quote, has not led to any more releases is probably feeding the desperation now.
Ah, I see. Like, we tried that path, it didn't work long term.
Exactly. It highlights a past attempt at a non-military solution that stalled. So maybe that reinforces the government's argument for military pressure in their eyes.
And while simultaneously making the protesters even more insistent that military action isn't the answer, because look, diplomacy failed before, or wasn't sustained perhaps. Did the report say why it failed?
It didn't detail the specific reasons for the breakdown, no, but it definitely paints that picture of a fragile attempt that didn't ultimately bring everyone home.
Okay. And then right in the middle of all this internal tension, the report mentions this Hamas video.
Yeah, released on the same Saturday as the protests, it claimed to show Hamas members rescuing an injured Israeli captive. Local media apparently identified him as Maxim Herkin.
Rescuing him. From where?
From the rubble of a tunnel, supposedly after an Israeli strike hit it.
Wow. That's, well, obviously a piece of propaganda from Hamas's side, likely designed to stir things up even more.
Almost certainly. It feeds their narrative, and it definitely pours fuel on the fire, adding to the family's anxieties.
Okay, so let's try and pull these threads together. What we're really seeing is this incredibly stark, painful clash, aren't we?
Yeah, you've got the deeply personal, emotional drive to save the captives running right up against the government's strategic military goals in Gaza.
And that clash is creating serious visible pressure inside Israel. Understanding why the government feels military pressure is the route is key to why the families feel so unheard, right?
Absolutely. You have the families and protesters pleading, just desperate with fear for their loved ones.
And contrasting that with the government saying victory over Hamas is the top priority, and maybe the captives' return is seen as something that follows that military success, not precedes it.
That seems to be the tension, yes.
So it really leaves you wondering, doesn't it? When you see these deep splits within Israel itself, on top of the already incredibly complex conflict, what are the long-term ripple effects for the region?
It's a huge question.
And what does this whole internal struggle tell us about just how difficult, maybe even impossible it is to achieve both national security and get every single captive back safely? Certainly a lot to think about.